Carlton have now won 6 in a row for the first time since 2000. No win for Carlton supporters felt more sweet than beating the Magpies, who looked the clear, far superior team in the competition, and therefore for this matchup. And when reflecting on how Carlton overcame the odds to beat the Pies, there's a lot of things you could attribute to this unlikely victory. But there's one thing that defined this matchup and Carlton's turnaround, and that is mentality. The impact of mentality to Carlton's recent performance stretches back to the adversity faced earlier this year. It is said that success does not come with time, it comes with toil, and that you don't need a wagon load of confidence to embark on learning. You just need to believe in improvement over time. Michael Voss, in his post-game presser, said this:
"We've learned a lot about ourselves over the most recent of times, which were pretty tough times, and we stayed calm through that period of time. Through that tough time, we've been able to stick together, and they're really playing a selfless brand of football. They're playing for each other and don't want to let each other down, and I think that's really obvious now."
And so this statement is very applicable to what Carlton were facing, because despite being down in the dumps, experience was culminating. This is what Patrick Cripps had to say about that.
Well, there felt like it was a storm externally, but internally it was actually really calm. I felt like from the board down, there was actually a lot of stability. And Vossi's been through enough in his time to know how the whole industry works. So he was really confident in his processes, what he was doing. And one thing I really took from what he did through that time is how up and about and optimistic he was. He just showed up the same way, no matter win or loss.
And Michael Voss never denied that Carlton would never improve, just that it would organically happen. And it has. The build-up to this game was important too. Obviously, Carlton lost agonisingly last season in what was the nail in the coffin for another shortcoming in making finals. This year, Collingwood trumped the Blues in convincing fashion. Carlton going into this one, winning 5 on the trot, are a far cry to what they were in that round 10 matchup. Obviously, you consider the rivalry, the hatred shared between both sides. That transcends beyond the confines of the MCG. We see that in Yarra Park through the pre-game and post-game banter.
You all suck! Top 4, here we come!
It gets to your workplace. We see that on social media now more than ever. Obviously, every game is approached with the task of winning, but a Carlton Collingwood fixture through that hatred amplifies that hunger to win even more. So it's clear Carlton had a chip on their shoulder. You've got the thought amongst the group that Collingwood have had the better of the team in recent memory. Collingwood have the leverage to instill a minor setback in Carlton's finals hopes. Again. And it was about Carlton's mentality going into the fixture, believing in all that they've worked for. For Carlton, this was a fixture where the mindset was, as Voss said, about what the approach would be for the rest of the year. We've got something to gain. A mindset that's beneficial because it takes the burden off, and also for the fact it can help the Blues gauge how they level out against the best team in the comp. It's said that mentally tough performers refuse to be intimidated. Instead, they intimidate the opposition with their presence. It is about holding yourself together, dealing with the inevitable nerves that are fluttering around, however much you wish they weren't. And despite all the nerves present, whether that may be because of the past or the situation at hand, it's about the present. Something Michael Voss and his playing group state with regularity. And that indeed put them at good stead to embrace the Collingwood contest with both hands and do that intimidating. So let's move forward to where you can see the importance of that mentality taking shape. We can look as surface level as how the game played out. Carlton won, but not without plenty of fight by the Pies, who kicked numerous goals on multiple occasions to cut down the deficit. Most quarters, the Pies started strong, registering scores relatively quickly. Each time, Carlton responded and held firm, and they didn't alter from their game plan irrespective of how much they looked under threat. Michael Voss said in his post-game presser,
We didn't change anything with how we wanted to play. We want to still stay daring. We still want to bring pressure on the ball, and they remain really present and really focused to the moment and finished off the game really strongly.
For a side as dangerous as Collingwood when trailing at three-quarter time, you'd think our lead of 19 points was not going to be intact for much longer. But the psychology of not having that thought in your mind proved crucial, as we knew when to put our foot on the gas after absorbing pressure for long enough. We saw in the Power Pies game what mentality can do when you redirect your game plan, because you know how formidable the Pies are going into last quarters. And you also discussed the power of momentum. Collingwood usually are pretty forthright with their game plan, they're direct, they love contested footy, they love taking risks. When Carlton started to cancel out all of these sources of success, forcing them wider and into errors as they played Collingwood's own game, it instills into the mind of the Pies, what do we do now? What's our fallback option? And if this happens in the middle of a quarter, that stuff is really difficult to correct, especially being so integral to the game plan, and given you can't just stop the game and regroup. I see this second quarter example as a great example where the Pies try to switch, they get deterred because we block it off, then as they try to, in typical Collingwood fashion, manufacture something out of nothing by approaching risk, Carlton are able to flip the script and rebound off their backline after a turnover, eventually getting numbers wide open over the top. It has been said that it is not the denial of the problem, but the efficiency of the response, and that statement couldn't be any more applicable to many situations on Friday night. You have the Charlie Curnow-Darcy Moore matchup, which was a fascinating watch. Early in the game, Charlie found it difficult to get involved, and it looked like it was going to be a long night for him. Sometimes the kick didn't correlate with his positioning, or Darcy Moore took the lead in that matchup taking front position, and Nathan Murphy was also effective in assisting. Charlie's mentality needed to remain stable and level-headed. He needs to ask himself, how can I find a way around this problem? I don't have Harry Mackay or Jack Silvani to kick a bag and take the attention away from me. I have to manifest it. And to his credit, he did. He came up the ground knowing Darcy Moore would sag off to get him involved. He knew that in a one-on-one in isolation, that's where there could be a point of exploitation. Equally, trying to fight back in this tug of war was Darcy Moore, who was trying to ensure that Charlie Curnow didn't get his way, that he had control in the matchup. Well, Darcy Moore could never counter this, and Carlton were the better side for it. 6 goals for Charlie after in the previous game, Darcy Moore collected 10 intercept marks. Moore, instead of taking intercept marks, was giving away as many free kicks. That takes mental strength to disregard the past history and believe that you're the better player, not be less aggressive knowing the caliber of player you're up against. You can see mentality take hold of a player negatively through Nick Daicos, where, contrastingly to Curnow flipping the script positively, Daicos was affected negatively. Early in the game, Daicos was of the belief that Carlton were going to allow him to get disposal. Sure, he knew it wouldn't be easy, for that's the player he is, but Carlton would give him permission to run and they were a little bit less physical with him. This example in the early stages sort of signifies that Akers tells Hewitt to run with his direct matchup side bottom, and Hewitt trusts Akers with Daicos. And then you can see when Daicos gets the footy, there's a little bit of frustration from Hewitt. Think we'd much rather give up a cheap kick wide than let Daicos get it in a more centralised area. You could see though, as the world started to close in on him as the game wore on, a very rarely seen frazzled Nick Daicos emerged. Carlton planted a seed into Nick's brain that his impact would not be felt. He would find things tougher, and Daicos would be like a puzzle piece that doesn't really fit, doing what his game isn't accustomed to. And it was a collective effort to achieve this, not one sole player. This is what Cripper had to say a couple weeks ago.
We're old school. We're going, why aren't we tagging? Why don't you tagging these blokes? You tell me why he wouldn't.
You back your system in. I think there's always going to be accountability on the best players, because how can we still minimise what they can do but sort of maximise our strengths? The hard thing with the best teams is, you put so much time into one, then they can start manipulate the structure around the stoppage and the game. You got DeGoey, Penderbury, Tom Mitchell. So you put all your effort into Daicos, all of a sudden DeGoey gets off. But you also got to be calculated about, you want to shut him down, but is that going to give someone else, more of a crack? So.
And you could see that system countering Daicos' impact well. Whilst he wouldn't be bogged down, on occasion you could see less urgency and more hesitancy seep in. As at stoppages, Daicos was a bit more isolated from where the action was. There was a lot more handballing, some poor disposal, something that for Collingwood's sake is quite alarming given they need Daicos firing on all cylinders to enhance their style of play. This example embodies that. There's a 50-50 and while the ball sits up and away from Daicos, if he clatters into Newman and doesn't hesitate, there's probably a ball up here. Instead, because Daicos does neither and his teammates follow suit as Cripps barges through, it eventually leads to a crucial goal. If Daicos mentally thinks differently, that he's getting his way, he's probably not showing that same hesitancy. Then you look at the aspect of team camaraderie. All season long, win, loss or draw, putting up rubbish performances or excellent performances, these players have stuck fat with one another. A group stands taller when each player knows their teammates are there in their successes and their defeats. That's why something like tackles and individual efforts are so important. They set the precedent and elevate your standard, giving you that adrenaline rush. They tell your teammates we're in charge here. They tell your teammates to do the same. And for the player doing those individual efforts, teammates backing you in because of those efforts and congratulating you for the good you've achieved drives you to do the same thing again. A guy who embodies this nature of these efforts I'm talking about is Sam Doherty. The guy got crunched, but he wasn't deterred, maintaining his ferocity, going back with the flight on numerous occasions, forcing errors off of instinct, and setting that precedent the leaders must push. We can also talk about a guy like Ollie Hollands. His individual effort, which has been documented, the spoil followed by the kick inside 50, was excellent. And for young players to get lauded by their teammates, it matters. You can see Jack Martin get around Ollie, and it's those little things which promote Ollie to do the important things again. Cripper had to say this about the whole concept.
My whole philosophy around leadership is how can I make guys feel good about themselves? How can I build confidence and belief, especially the young guys? Know how much, as a leader, you can impact a young guy's career. Yeah, that positive reinforcement, then all of a sudden, like, yeah, I've done the work now, and the leaders are noticing. I'm going to do it again, and all of a sudden, their own game builds.
And Voss also said the following:
I'm being really impressed with our leaders in more recent times. The first conversation I had with them when we had to have some pretty tough ones was about where they saw themselves as leaders, and they accepted it. No one blinked. They didn't know quite how to go about it at that point in time, but they've learned how to do that over this last little while, and we'll just be stronger for the experience that we had.
I found it pretty telling in a game like this, the consistency in our players coming up to outnumber the ball carrier to trap them, leaving their opponent wide open, willing to run the risk. Mindset plays into a scenario like this because irrespective of circumstance, players backed their own individual ability and they backed their teammates to cover for them if the ball got over the back. Though they didn't believe the ball would get over the back because they backed to themselves and their teammates to get the job done. This didn't always work, but has worked wonders for how the result ended on Friday and how they have panned out in recent weeks. Simultaneously, Collingwood were reluctant and pressured in everything they did, whilst the Blues continued to hold ascendancy because this mentality stayed true through the whole game and ensured we didn't let up. Here's an example that embodies those traits where they try to burst through the congestion, but we do well to hold them up. And then even as it looks like they're onto something, as they will it forward, our presence is enough to force a turnover and earn a free kick. This is where the belief in your teammates' ability to cover for you comes in handy. They had an open number, but numbers got back to shoulder the load, and that was consistent throughout. This is probably my favorite example, where it starts as a dump kick to a 3-on-2, but the double teaming buys enough time for the next man up to get across, and then for the next man to get across, and an unlikely result ensues. Yet again, the belief in your teammates in this case to get over and help and cover, as well as keeping the ship afloat until reinforcements arrive. And then this one too, just numbers constantly rolling over to cover for the man who committed prior was wonderful to watch. Sure, you have to overexert yourself, but it's the kind of physical exertion required to beat the Pies. Another key feature of the game was mistakes, and there were a lot of them. Goal kicking errors, 50-metre penalties, both glaring issues for the Pies and the Blues respectively. But it's said that making mistakes or even having clear deficits doesn't mean you aren't or won't be good at something. It's simply an occasion for learning. For the Pies, goal kicking was something that never ever fixed itself. It was like a pest that wouldn't go away. It continued to harass the Pies the whole way through, and it could be argued as a reason for their loss. On the flip side, the Blues started their game with some rash errors, a bit of overuse, mental lapses, etc. And umpiring can also come into play. Whether the decision is correct or incorrect, it's important to not get sucked into what happened previously, because what's happening in the moment is most important. Unlike the Pies, who could never amend their issues, Carlton did. Jack Martin started the game giving away 2 irrational 50-metre penalties that could have been quite hurtful for the Blues. But his impact was strong consistently for the rest of the game. He kicked goals, he worked hard, a number of blocks freed up Curnow from Darcy more, a presence which we didn't have in the previous meeting, all of which made amends. And that can lift a team as well when you know you've got players mentally strong to fight through whatever's thrown at them. Challenges which usually hit you like a bus against teams usually in the race to win a flag. Going back to Hollands, he showed the same resilience. This first quarter example was one he may have wanted to do differently. And sure, Maynard's much more superior in scenarios like these, but you'd ideally want to keep your feet. Even if you cause a tie-up and a ball-up, that's much better than giving Collingwood a chance to rebound, something they're so good at. But his response is excellent. Both immediately where he applies a tackle and is involved in a score, and then down the line where he holds up in a couple of one-on-ones because he's not discouraged, and he also changes how he approached the Maynard example as he's exposed to a similar situation. And then we talk about what the result does to mentality. The spirit of the group lifts, the capability of the team reaches new bounds, and the team knows this. The belief of the team grows again as they realize that any team is beatable when at their best, and they're functioning at a standard they want to be at. The backing of one another grows as even with absences, players committed to the task and got the job done. And most importantly, that message of Voss talking about mentality has a new validity. Mentality, as said when this video began, was a theme of Vossi's presses over the season. But now it's springing into action, and those words of Vossi hold new weight. This mentality is a mentality that is now refined through experience, and it's very real. It would appear that to progress from strong performer to champion, the breakthrough ingredient is mental toughness. It is this attribute that allows sport performers to act in an instinctive and automatic way at the most important moments and the turning points of a competition or other high stakes situations. It is no coincidence that Carlton stood up to the tall task of playing Collingwood and beating them convincingly, because their mental toughness is strong. The main takeaway is that this team believes in what they're doing now, believes in each other to get the job done, nor want to let each other down. Cripper had to say this about that.
And like I said at the start of the interview, it's sort of, we feel like now we know what makes us the best version of us as a side. And
Vossi repeats the same sentiment.
Through just being able to believe in what we were doing and I guess believing a little bit in each other, and sort of stuck together through that to sort of find what our identity looked like. And when that became clearer, the players have got more in behind it and they've thrived off the back of it.
With plenty of players to return, Carlton become a formidable team to play in the run home and potentially into September. But with a mentality this strong through the earlier adversities they've had to face, Carlton could very well be one of the most complete football sides in the comp as it currently sits. Let me know what you think. Are there any observations you made with regards to mentality that stuck out to you? If you have enjoyed, make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the show as well for Carlton analysis for the rest of the year. Share it around if you think it's worth it. Thanks again for supporting. Bye for now.